Commander Rex Holden had exactly two personality traits that defined his entire existence: an ego the size of Jupiter and the tactical intelligence of a concussed goldfish. These qualities made him the perfect human representative to the Galactic Combat Arena, which, if you think about it, says everything you need to know about humanity's standing in the galaxy. The arena itself was your typical overly dramatic alien megastructure. Picture the Colosseum, but if it was designed by someone who thought the original wasn't nearly gaudy enough and had access to graviton manipulators. Floating platforms, energy shields, holographic advertisements for tentacle beer, the whole 9 parsecs. Rex strutted through the registration hall like he owned the place, which was particularly amusing considering humans had been galactic members for exactly 6 months, and their biggest contribution so far had been introducing the concept of pizza delivery to 14-star systems. Behind the registration desk sat Vex Glorbnoth, a Blethorian whose species had evolved from what could best be described as a cross between a toad and a particularly judgmental drama teacher. "Next," Vex croaked, not bothering to look up from his holographic paperwork. His translator made him sound perpetually bored, which honestly wasn't that far from accurate. "Commander Rex Holden representing the Human-Terran Federation for the Apex Predator Championship," Rex announced, puffing out his chest like a peacock who'd been hitting the protein shakes. Now Vex looked up. His 3 eyes blinked in sequence, which in Blethorian culture was the equivalent of a snort of derision. "Humans? In the Apex Predator Championship?" He gestured with one of his many arms at a massive holographic display showing previous winners. "You do realize this is for species that actually produce dangerous creatures, not ones that get excited about domesticating wolves." Rex's grin only widened. "Oh, we've got predators, all right. Earth's ecosystem is basically one big murder buffet. We've got creatures that'll make your tentacles curl." "Uh-huh?" Vex's tone could have flash-frozen a sun. "And what exactly are you planning to enter? Please don't tell me it's one of those bears you humans are always going on about." "The Ursian Empire's plasma bears will literally melt anything with organic compounds." "Even better," Rex said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Honey badger." The silence that followed was so profound it could have been registered as a new form of matter. Vex's 3 eyes slowly widened in what could charitably be called disbelief, or more accurately, secondhand embarrassment. "A honey badger," Vex repeated slowly, the way you might say, thermonuclear weapon, if you were trying to explain it to a particularly dim child. "That's right. Mellivora capensis. Nature's perfect little psychopath." Vex pulled up Earth's biological database on his holographic display, scrolled through a few entries, and then stared at Rex like he'd just announced his intention to fight a black hole with a pool noodle. "This is a small mammal that weighs approximately 28 pounds. Best 28 pounds of concentrated spite in the known universe," Rex said proudly. "Commander Holden," Vex said, his translator adding extra layers of condescension that probably violated several diplomatic treaties. "The current defending champion is a crystalline death scorpion from Proxima Nightmare. It's 12 feet tall, has armor plating that can deflect antimatter rounds, and its sting can dissolve molecular bonds. You want to fight it with something that looks like it should be selling car insurance?" Rex just smiled that insufferably confident smile that had gotten him promoted 3 times and nearly court-martialed twice. "Trust me on this one, Vex. Sometimes the galaxy's deadliest predator comes in a small, furry package." And that, ladies and gentlemen, was how humanity managed to turn an intergalactic combat tournament into what would eventually be remembered as the most expensive practical joke in recorded history. Dr. Marina Kowalski had spent the last 15 years studying xenobiology, which meant she was uniquely qualified to recognize a catastrophically stupid idea when she heard one. Standing in the human delegation's quarters aboard the arena station, watching Rex pace back and forth like a caffeinated motivational speaker, she felt her left eye begin that familiar twitch that meant her blood pressure was entering orbital velocity. "Rex, let me explain this one more time," she said, adjusting her glasses with the weary patience of someone who'd clearly had this conversation before. "The honey badger is not a superweapon. It's a medium-sized carnivore with an attitude problem and 0 sense of self-preservation." "Exactly," Rex spun around, pointing at her like she'd just solved quantum mechanics. 0 sense of self-preservation. Do you know what that means in a combat scenario? It means it dies horribly and we become a galactic laughingstock. It means it doesn't know when to quit." Before Marina could explain the fundamental difference between persistence and survival, the door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. In walked what could generously be described as a man, though walking tree trunk with opposable thumbs might be more accurate. This was Grunt, whose official title was Specialized Animal Handler, but whose actual job description was the only person crazy enough to work with honey badgers professionally. "Grunt," Rex said cheerfully, "tell Dr. Kowalski about our little champion." Grunt looked at Marina, looked at Rex, then made a sound that was part growl, part sigh, and entirely unintelligible. Somehow, everyone in the room understood perfectly. He thought this was insane but was getting paid too much to care. "See?" Rex beamed. "Even Grunt agrees this is brilliant." Marina rubbed her temples. "That's not what he said. You don't speak Grunt." "Nobody speaks Grunt. He communicates entirely through variations of grunting." Grunt nodded sagely and made another sound, this one conveying something along the lines of, "The Badger is currently destroying the reinforced containment unit and seems to be enjoying it." Meanwhile, 3 levels down in the arena's preparation chambers, the competition was taking things significantly more seriously. The Zephyrian delegation had brought something called a Void Stalker, which looked like a panther crossed with a black hole and moved like death having a really good day. The Crystalline Empire's representative was busy feeding raw neutronium to their death scorpion, which clicked its claws with the sound of tectonic plates having a disagreement. And then there were the Ursanians with their plasma bear. Imagine a grizzly bear, but if it was made of contained stellar fire and had developed anger management issues. Its trainer was giving it a pep talk that mostly consisted of pointing at holographic images of previous opponents and making encouraging roaring sounds. Back in the human quarters, Rex was consulting his tablet with the focused intensity of someone who'd definitely not done any actual research until 5 minutes ago. "Look at these betting odds," he said excitedly. "We're listed at 15,000 to 1. Do you know what kind of payout we're looking at if we win? Do you know what kind of medical bills we're looking at when that thing gets vaporized in the first 30 seconds? Marina shot back. Grunt made another sound, this one roughly translating to, "The Badger has figured out how to open the containment unit from the inside and is now exploring the ventilation system." Rex's eyes lit up. "See, it's already showing tactical intelligence." "That's not tactical intelligence, that's breaking and entering." Tomato, tomato. Marina pulled up the tournament brackets on her datapad and immediately regretted it. The honey badger was scheduled to face off against creatures that required hazmat teams just to clean up after them. The Void Stalker alone had a warning label longer than most diplomatic treaties. "Rex," she said slowly, "I need you to understand something. These aren't Earth predators. These are creatures that evolved on worlds where the concept of maximum lethality was considered a starting point. The plasma bear's home planet has an atmospheric composition that would kill our badger before it even left the transport pod." Rex waved dismissively. Details, you're thinking too much like a scientist and not enough like a warrior." "I'm thinking like someone who doesn't want to explain to Earth Command why we sent a 28-pound mammal to fight something that eats antimatter for breakfast." Grunt made a longer, more complex sound that somehow managed to convey both resignation and a strange sort of professional pride. He was saying, essentially, that he'd trained the badger as best he could, but at the end of the day, honey badgers were gonna honey badger, and there wasn't much anyone could do about it. And somewhere in the ventilation system above them, a small, furry creature with absolutely no concept of appropriate fear levels was about to make galactic history for all the wrong reasons. The arena's main amphitheater was a masterpiece of intimidation architecture. 200,000 seats arranged in perfect tiers around a combat zone that could simulate any environment from Arctic tundra to molten lava fields. Today it was set to generic death maze, which featured jagged rocks, convenient hiding spots, and what appeared to be a moat filled with something that glowed ominously. Vex Glorbnoth had traded his registration desk for the announcer's booth, where he floated in a gravity harness surrounded by enough holographic displays to run a small planet. His voice boomed across the arena, with the kind of dramatic flair that suggested he'd been practicing in the shower. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted non-binary life forms," he bellowed. "Welcome to the Apex Predator Championship. Today, 8 of the galaxy's most lethal creatures will enter this arena. Only 1 will leave." The crowd erupted in cheers that registered on the Richter scale. Apparently, watching things get violently dismembered was a universal constant across all species. "First," Vex continued, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, "from the shadow worlds of Zephyr Prime, weighing in at 600 pounds of concentrated nightmare fuel, the Void Stalker." A section of the arena floor opened, and something that looked like darkness had learned to hate emerged. The Void Stalker moved like liquid shadow, its form seeming to bend light around it. The crowd gasped appropriately. Next, from the crystal caves of Proxima Nightmare, our defending champion, dramatic pause, the crystalline death scorpion. The scorpion rose from the arena floor on a hydraulic platform, and honestly, calling it a scorpion was like calling a tsunami a splash. 12 feet of crystalline armor that reflected the arena lights like a disco ball of death. Its tail curved over its back, the stinger dripping with something that probably violated several laws of chemistry. From the burning plains of Ursania Major, Vex was really getting into his groove now. The creature that taught fire how to be angry, the plasma bear! The bear materialized in a flash of contained nuclear fusion. It stood on its hind legs and roared, which sounded like a star going supernova had decided to express its feelings. The arena's temperature sensors immediately started flashing warnings. The introductions continued with escalating absurdity. There was the razor wing from Talon 4, which looked like someone had crossed a pterodactyl with a food processor. The acid spitter from the corrosive nebula, whose mere presence was causing the arena floor to smoke slightly. The phase hunter from Dimension X7, which kept flickering in and out of visible reality like a cosmic glitch. And then there was the bone crusher from Calcium 7, which was exactly what it sounded like and probably responsible for several therapy bills among arena maintenance staff. And finally, Vex's voice took on a tone that suggested he was physically struggling not to laugh. From the distant world of Earth, representing humanity in their first ever arena appearance. The crowd leaned forward expectantly. Surely the newcomers had brought something spectacular to justify their presence among such legendary killers. Weighing in at a mighty 28 pounds. Confused murmurs rippled through the audience. That couldn't be right. The translator must have malfunctioned. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you... Vex paused, apparently checking his notes to make sure he wasn't having a stroke. The honey badger. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in vacuum. Then, slowly, a platform rose from the arena floor, carrying what appeared to be a slightly oversized pet carrier with air holes. Rex stood in the human delegation box, waving enthusiastically at a crowd that was staring at him like he'd just announced his intention to marry a black hole. That's right, folks, Earth's finest! Marina buried her face in her hands. We're never going to live this down. Grunt made a sound that roughly translated to I tried to warn everyone but nobody listens to the grunt guy. In the arena, the other predators were sizing up the competition. The Voidstalker tilted what might have been its head, clearly wondering if this was some kind of elaborate joke. The Death Scorpion's clicking intensified, which in Scorpion language probably meant, seriously? This is what we're working with? The Plasma Bear just looked confused, which was understandable since it had been psyching itself up to fight creatures of legendary status, not something that looked like it belonged in a petting zoo. The human entry appears to be... Vex squinted at his display. Sleeping. Yes, folks, while the galaxy's most feared predators prepare for battle, Earth's representative is taking a nap in its carrier. And indeed, from the pet carrier came the soft rhythmic sound of snoring. The honey badger, completely oblivious to the fact that it was about to face creatures that could rearrange matter at the molecular level, was catching up on its beauty sleep. This has to be some kind of psychological warfare, whispered someone in the Zephyrian delegation. Rex just smiled wider and gave the crowd a thumbs up that somehow managed to be both cheerful and deeply, deeply ominous. The arena's combat zone hummed to life as force fields activated and environmental controls kicked in. 8 platforms rose from the floor, each carrying a predator that evolution had specifically designed to ruin someone's day. Well, 7 predators and 1 pet carrier that was still emanating gentle snoring sounds. Contestants, prepare for combat, Vex's voice echoed across the amphitheater. Remember, this is a battle royale. Last creature standing wins, arena defenses are active, escape is impossible, and medical teams are standing by with really good insurance policies. The countdown began. 10 seconds on the holographic display. The Voidstalker phased partially out of reality, becoming a living shadow that hurt to look at directly. The Death Scorpion's crystalline armor began to glow with stored energy. The Plasma Bear's internal temperature spiked so high that the air around it started to shimmer like a heat mirage. Each creature was a masterpiece of lethality, honed by millions of years of evolution and several decades of selective breeding by species who took their combat sports very seriously. 5 seconds. In the human delegation box, Rex was bouncing on his toes like a kid on Christmas morning. This is it, people. Time to show the galaxy what Earth is made of. Marina had her hands pressed to her face, watching through her fingers like someone viewing a horror movie. I can't look. Tell me when it's over. Grunt made a sound that was equal parts anticipation and resignation, roughly translating to, well, this is either going to be legendary or a very expensive veterinary bill. 3 seconds. The pet carrier gave a small rattle as something inside stirred. Apparently all the noise was starting to interfere with nap time. 1 second. Begin, Vex roared. What happened next could best be described as controlled chaos with a side of physics violations. The plasma bear immediately charged the nearest target, which happened to be the razor wing. The bird creature took flight, its metallic feathers gleaming as it dove toward the acid spitter, who responded by launching a stream of molecular-grade corrosive at the phase hunter, who promptly shifted into a parallel dimension to avoid it. The Voidstalker did what Voidstalkers do best and simply vanished, becoming one with the shadows cast by the arena's dramatic lighting. The Death Scorpion, being the defending champion and clearly tired of sharing the spotlight, let out a crystalline shriek that shattered 3 of the arena's reinforced observation windows and charged straight into the melee. And in the middle of all this carefully orchestrated violence, the pet carrier door swung open. Now there are certain moments in galactic history that historians will debate for centuries. The Great Expansion, the Unification Wars, the invention of faster-than-light pizza delivery. But none of them quite compare to the moment when a sleepy honey badger emerged from its carrier, looked around at the chaos surrounding it, and made a decision that would fundamentally alter the course of interspecies relations. It decided it was hungry. "Oh, look at that," Rex said, his voice carrying the kind of manic enthusiasm usually reserved for people who've just discovered a new form of caffeine. "She's awake! Come on, Bertha, show them what you've got!" Bertha, because of course Rex had named the honey badger Bertha. Because apparently regular names weren't sufficient for what was about to become the most expensive 28 pounds in galactic history. Bertha stretched, yawned with the casual indifference of someone who'd never heard of existential dread, and began wandering across the arena floor. Not stalking, not hunting, wandering. Like she was taking a stroll through a particularly interesting park that happened to be full of creatures specifically designed to end life as we know it. The Razorwing, currently engaged in an aerial dogfight with the phase hunter, noticed the small mammal below and made what would later be recognized as a critical tactical error. It dove, metallic talons extended, clearly intending to remove the honey badger from the equation before it could become a factor. Bertha looked up, saw several 100 pounds of flying death approaching at terminal velocity, and did what honey badgers have been doing for millions of years when faced with threats they should logically run from. She stood her ground and got annoyed. What happened next violated several laws of physics, most principles of common sense, and at least 3 interstellar treaties governing the use of biological weapons in sporting events. Bertha reared up on her hind legs, and, with timing that would have made professional boxers weep with envy, delivered a swipe that caught the Razorwing right in what passed for its face. The bird creature, which had been moving at roughly Mach 2, suddenly found itself subject to what physicists call rapid involuntary deceleration. It hit the arena wall with a sound like a gong being struck by a meteor, slid down to the floor, and lay there making confused chirping noises. The arena fell silent except for the ongoing battle between the remaining 6 predators, who suddenly found themselves dealing with a much more pressing concern than each other. "Did that just happen?" Vex's professional announcer voice cracked slightly. "Did a 28-pound mammal just punch out a Razorwing?" Rex pumped his fist in the air. "That's my girl. Classic Earth fighting technique." "That's not a fighting technique," Marina protested. "That's just honey badger being honey badger." "Exactly," Rex beamed. "Pure, concentrated Earth attitude." Meanwhile, Bertha had completely lost interest in the unconscious bird and was now investigating a particularly interesting rock formation. The fact that this rock formation was actually the lower leg of the bone crusher seemed to be a minor detail as far as she was concerned. The bone crusher looked down at the small creature that was now sniffing around its feet and made a sound that roughly translated to, "Excuse me, but what exactly do you think you're doing down there?" Bertha looked up at approximately 12 feet of calcium-based killing machine and came to a conclusion that defied all logic, reason, and basic survival instincts. The big thing was between her and wherever she wanted to go next. This was clearly unacceptable. What followed could only be described as the most one-sided David and Goliath story in recorded history, except David was a furry sociopath with no concept of appropriate fear responses, and Goliath was a 12-foot-tall walking nightmare made of compressed calcium and bad intentions. Bertha did what honey badgers do when faced with obstacles. she went through them, or, in this case, up them. With claws that evolution had specifically designed for digging through concrete-hard termite mounds, she began scaling the bone crusher like it was a particularly challenging jungle gym. The bone crusher, for its part, had never encountered anything quite like this. Its usual opponents either ran away screaming or attacked, with the kind of strategic thinking that millions of years of evolution had hammered into sensible creatures. They did not treat it like a climbing frame with an attitude problem. "What is it doing?" the bone crusher's trainer shouted from the delegation box. "Why isn't it afraid?" Rex, meanwhile, was providing running commentary with the enthusiasm of someone who'd clearly had too much caffeine and not enough sleep. "Look at that technique. Classic honey badger vertical assault. She's going for the neck region." "That's not technique," Marina yelled back. "That's just psychotic persistence." Same difference. Bertha had indeed reached the bone crusher's neck area, and was now doing what honey badgers do best, being absolutely, relentlessly, impossibly annoying. She wasn't trying to kill the massive creature, which was probably fortunate for everyone involved. She was just trying to get it to move out of her way, using the time-honored honey badger method of making its life miserable until it complied. The bone crusher began shaking its head violently, trying to dislodge the small mammal that had somehow turned into the worst case of cosmic dandruff in galactic history. This had the unfortunate side effect of causing it to stumble backward, directly into the ongoing fight between the plasma bear and the death scorpion. Now the plasma bear and death scorpion had been engaged in what could charitably be called a strategic exchange of violent intent. The bear's plasma claws were leaving glowing scratches on the scorpion's crystalline armor, while the scorpion's stinger was dripping acid that made the air itself scream. It was the kind of epic battle that would normally be the centerpiece of any respectable combat tournament. Instead, it was completely upstaged by a 12-foot walking skeleton with a honey badger attached to its head, stumbling through their fight like a drunk person at a ballet recital. The collision was spectacular. The bone crusher crashed into the death scorpion, which reflexively lashed out with its tail, striking the plasma bear, who roared and released a burst of stellar fire that caught the phase hunter as it materialized from whatever dimension it had been hiding in. And through all of this, Bertha held on with the determination of someone who had never heard the word impossible and wouldn't have cared if she had. "Unbelievable!" Vex's announcer voice had climbed several octaves. "The honey badger has somehow managed to turn the defending champion, the bone crusher, and the plasma bear into her own personal wrecking crew." In the arena, the acid spitter had been watching this chaos unfold with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. It had been planning a careful, strategic approach to the battle, using its corrosive abilities to slowly weaken opponents while staying at a safe distance. This plan was working perfectly, until the phase hunter, still smoking from its unexpected encounter with stellar fire, materialized directly behind it, while trying to escape the ongoing catastrophe. The acid spitter spun around, saw the phase hunter, and did what acid spitters do when surprised. It spat. A lot. The phase hunter, already having a very bad day, tried to phase shift again, but was apparently too disoriented to manage it properly. Instead of shifting dimensions, it just became partially transparent, which meant the acid went right through it and hit the arena wall behind it. The wall began to dissolve with a sound like chemistry having a nervous breakdown. "Attention," the arena's AI announced in the kind of calm voice that suggested it had been programmed by people who understood the importance of not panicking during emergencies. "Structural integrity is now at 60% and falling. Please remain in your seats and try not to make any sudden movements that might cause reality to collapse." Meanwhile, Bertha had grown tired of riding the bone crusher and decided to explore other options. She leaped off the massive creature's head with the casual grace of someone who'd never heard of gravity, and landed squarely on the back of the plasma bear, who was at that moment trying to untangle itself from the death scorpion. The bear felt something small and furry land on its back, and made the understandable assumption that it was under attack. It began spinning in circles, trying to dislodge whatever had latched onto it, which had the effect of turning it into a whirling dervish of contained nuclear fusion. The death scorpion, still trying to recover from being crashed into by a walking skeleton, found itself face to face with several hundred pounds of spinning plasma bearing, and made what was probably the first sensible decision anyone had made since the battle started. It tried to run away. This turned out to be impossible, since the Voidstalker had been waiting in the shadows for exactly this kind of opportunity. It materialized behind the fleeing scorpion like a nightmare given form, and struck with claws that could cut through space-time itself. The impact sent the death scorpion sliding across the arena floor, where it crashed into the still dissolving wall, which promptly began dissolving faster thanks to the addition of crystalline armor fragments and whatever the scorpion's stinger was leaking. Structural integrity now at 30%, the AI announced with the same calm tone. We would like to remind all spectators that the arena's insurance policy does not cover interdimensional incidents or acts of small mammal. Bertha, still riding the spinning plasma bear like the galaxy's most dangerous carousel, had apparently decided that this was the most fun she'd had since someone had tried to remove her from a beehive the previous week. She was making little chittering sounds that, in honey badger language, probably translated to, "This is awesome, do it again." The bear, however, was getting dizzy, and when plasma bears get dizzy, interesting things happen to the local space-time continuum. It began to slow down, wobbling like a top that was running out of momentum, and finally collapsed in a heap. Bertha hopped off, looked around at the arena full of unconscious, dissolving, or fleeing predators, and made a decision that would echo through galactic history. She was still hungry, and there was a very interesting smell coming from the food vendor stalls outside the arena. With the single-minded determination that had made honey badgers the bane of everything from lions to landmines, she began walking toward the arena exit. The fact that there were force fields designed to keep contestants inside the combat zone was apparently another minor detail as far as she was concerned. She walked straight through the energy barrier like it was a mild inconvenience, leaving behind a small, badger-shaped hole that immediately began sparking ominously. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vex announced, in a voice that suggested he was reconsidering his career choices, "we have a winner. By process of elimination, complete indifference to conventional physics, and what can only be described as weaponized stubbornness, the victory goes to Earth's honey badger." The crowd sat in stunned silence, staring at the arena floor littered with the galaxy's most feared predators, all of whom had been defeated by something that weighed less than most people's luggage and was now wandering off to find a snack. Rex threw his hands in the air triumphantly. "I told you so! Earth's finest, undefeated and unimpressed." Marina just stared at the chaos below. "We're going to have to file so much paperwork, so much paperwork." Grunt made a sound that roughly translated to, "I need a drink." Several drinks, maybe an entire distillery. And somewhere in the distance, arena security was discovering that honey badgers were surprisingly difficult to catch when they really wanted to investigate the nacho stand. The emergency session of the Galactic Arena Council convened exactly 47 minutes after Bertha had wandered off with a stolen pretzel the size of her head. The council chamber, normally a place of dignified deliberation about combat regulations and safety protocols, now resembled a crisis management center during a particularly creative apocalypse. Council Chairman Zortex the Magnificent, whose species had evolved from what could best be described as disappointed mushrooms, floated at the head of the table, with the kind of expression that suggested he was questioning every life choice that had led him to this moment. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said, consulting a holographic report that kept updating itself as new damage assessments came in. "A single Earth mammal, weighing 28 pounds, has caused structural damage to our arena that will require 3 months and 40 million credits to repair." "Technically," Rex interjected from his seat at the defendant's table, "Bertha didn't cause the structural damage. That was the acid spitter. She just provided the motivation for the tactical repositioning that led to the architectural reconfiguration." Marina kicked him under the table, hard. Council member Bleep Bloop the Wise, whose translator made everything sound like a philosophical inquiry, leaned forward with his mechanical appendages clicking nervously. "Commander Holden, are you seriously arguing that your creature's complete disregard for basic physics and common sense was actually a sophisticated military strategy?" "I prefer to think of it as adaptive problem-solving with extreme prejudice," Rex replied with the kind of smile that had gotten him banned from 3 space stations and promoted to his current position. Grunt, who had been sitting silently in the corner, made a sound that roughly translated to, "I tried to warn everyone, but nobody listens to the guy who speaks in grunts, and now look where we are." The council members exchanged glances that somehow managed to convey both bewilderment and the dawning realization that they were dealing with something fundamentally outside their experience. "Furthermore," Chairman Zortex continued, his fungal fronds wilting slightly, "your honey badger has apparently taken up residence in the food court and is currently holding the nacho stand hostage. Our security team reports that she has constructed what can only be described as a fortress out of condiment dispensers and is charging other patrons a toll to access the cheese sauce." Rex perked up. "Entrepreneurial spirit. I love it." She bit 3 of our security officers. Well, they were probably bothering her during lunch. Everyone knows you don't mess with a honey badger's food time. Marina buried her face in her hands and made the kind of sound usually associated with structural engineering failures. Rex, please stop talking. Please. Councilmember Glorbnik the reasonably concerned raised what might have been a hand, though with his species it was difficult to tell where hands ended and existential dread began. The bigger issue is what this means for future competitions. We've had to implement emergency rule changes that we never thought would be necessary. He gestured to a holographic display that showed a rapidly expanding list of new regulations. Rule 847. No contestants may treat the arena as a climbing structure, regardless of species-specific behavioral patterns. Rule 848. Contestants must demonstrate awareness of their own mortality before being allowed to compete. Rule 849. Any creature that displays weaponized indifference to the laws of physics must undergo psychological evaluation. Rule 850. Honey badgers are hereby banned from all combat sports, recreational violence, and unsupervised snack access. Rex raised his hand. Question about Rule 850. Does that apply to all mustelids or just honey badgers specifically? The collective silence that followed was so profound it could have been used to calibrate deep space listening equipment. Because, Rex continued with the enthusiasm of someone who clearly hadn't learned when to stop talking, we've got wolverines, and those are basically honey badgers that went to anger management and decided it wasn't for them. Chairman Zortex made a sound like air escaping from a punctured habitat dome. Are you suggesting that your planet has multiple species of creatures like this? Oh, absolutely. Wolverines, Tasmanian devils, shrews, though technically shrews aren't mustelids, they're just really angry all the time. Oh, and there's this thing called a retel, but that's just another name for honey badger, so I guess that's covered under Rule 850. Marina had progressed from face-palming to what could only be described as aggressive praying to whatever cosmic forces might be listening. Then there are the insects, Rex continued, apparently mistaking the council's horrified silence for interest. Army ants, Africanized bees, bullet ants, though I guess those would be different weight classes. Stop! Chairman Zortex's voice boomed across the chamber with enough force to rattle the observation windows. Just stop! We get it. Your planet is a nightmare factory that produces creatures specifically designed to ignore reasonable behavior. Rex beamed. Thanks, we're pretty proud of our ecosystem's commitment to creative violence. Councilmember Threx, the perpetually anxious, whose species had evolved from creatures that had spent so much time worrying about predators they'd eventually become predators themselves, cleared what passed for a throat. The question remains, what do we do about this situation? Well, Rex said, pulling out his datapad, I've been thinking about that. What if we started an Earth species exhibition series? Nothing competitive, just educational demonstrations. We could start with something gentle, like maybe a Canadian goose. The sound of 7 alien species simultaneously hyperventilating filled the council chamber. Absolutely not, Chairman Zortex said with the finality of someone who had just glimpsed the heat death of the universe and decided it looked preferable to dealing with more Earth creatures. Rule 851. Earth species are hereby banned from all arena events, educational programs, petting zoos, and any activity that might involve them interacting with civilized life forms. What about Earth humans? Rex asked innocently. The pause that followed was filled with the kind of cosmic dread usually reserved for discussions about black holes and tax audits. Rule 852, Chairman Zortex said slowly. Humans may continue to participate in arena events, but only if they promise to leave their planet's wildlife at home. Rex nodded agreeably. That seems fair, though you might want to add a subsection about not letting us near your ecosystems unsupervised. We have a tendency to accidentally introduce invasive species that end up running entire planets. Marina finally looked up from her hands. Rex, I'm begging you. Please stop talking. Just being helpful? From somewhere in the distance came the sound of what the arena's PA system described as a minor nacho incident. Security reports later confirmed that Bertha had successfully negotiated a protection racket with the food court vendors and was now expanding her territory toward the souvenir stands. Grunt made a sound that roughly translated to, I quit. Effective immediately. I'm going to open a nice quiet flower shop on a planet where the most dangerous thing is seasonal allergies. And as the Galactic Arena Council hastily passed emergency legislation designed to prevent future encounters with Earth's wildlife, Rex Holden sat back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who had just introduced the galaxy to the concept of honey badger diplomacy. Somewhere in the food court, Bertha had discovered that alien ice cream contained lactose she could actually digest and was having what could only be described as the best day of her life. The galaxy, meanwhile, was quietly adding Earth to its list of planets we probably shouldn't visit without very good insurance. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how humanity managed to get an entire planet's worth of wildlife banned from galactic sporting events, after exactly one match, proving once and for all that sometimes the most effective diplomatic strategy is to bring a honey badger to a space fight.